Welcome to Unit 1. So, we're going to start at the very beginning with Indigenous Appalachia, and we're going to talk about geography and culture. The Appalachian Mountains are a massive 2,050-mile ancient range stretching from Newfoundland, Canada to central Alabama. The mountain range is divided into three distinct physiographic areas, which you can see here. And these are divided by local climates, ecosystems, and very much human history. In the end of this, we're probably going to focus most heavily on central Appalachia, but I still wanted you to know what the differences were between northern, central, and southern. And I'm not going to read it to you. You can see the differences here in front of you. And the map also shows you a really good view of what Appalachia is. A lot of people don't realize that it's not a continuous above water range. So if you look at the map, you can see that part of Appalachia is actually underwater, which I think is kind of cool. And here you see in front of you a different type of map. And this is where we start talking about the indigenous populations that existed before Europeans came over and started claiming land. So you can see there's 8 distinct tribes, but don't be confused that they are not all completely separate tribes. A whole bunch of them, if you will look at the list, is actually different bands of Cherokee. So you can see that most of them are concentrated in the South, but we do have the Seneca Nation up in New York. So this is not every single tribe. I mean, we lost so many tribes very quickly to disease that we don't know were there tribes in what we now call West Virginia, on the verge of Ohio or Kentucky. We don't know. So these are the tribes that we actually know about. And so here you go. Beautiful map, beautiful map. We're going to start with the Seneca Nation, just starting in the north in New York. And you may not know this, but the Iroquois Confederacy is made up of 6 different nations, and the Seneca Nation is one of those, and they are the largest tribe of that Iroquois Confederacy. So before Europeans ever had anything to do with this continent, these guys were already practicing a very democratic government. And in fact, it will be Ben Franklin who will approach some of the members of the Iroquois Confederacy, including the Seneca Nation, when our founding fathers were setting up our government, and he went to them and asked them for advice. How did they set their government up so efficiently, and so protective of people within that government? And so they became part of our democracy very quickly. So this group, for generations, they lived along the Finger Lakes. I'll get it out eventually, of New York, and they now reside in large portions of Western New York, including the cities of Buffalo and Niagara Falls. So Seneca families previously inhabited strong riverside communities protected by eastern woodland forest, and they lived very much in harmony with the land. And you can see their traditional log house home here. It's kind of made to blend in with the land. They didn't destroy a lot of land to create their homes. In fact, because in this one especially, it was built up on stilts. So they didn't dig into the earth, they built above the earth. And that's kind of how the Seneca Nation and really the whole Iroquois Confederacy looked at land as a thing to be protected and to be preserved. Now, among the tribes living around the Seneca tribe, others knew them as the Great Hill People. And the reason that they were known as that is because most tribes have a creation story. Where did they come from? And the Seneca is one of those tribes. And it is believed that their people just kind of showed up from a hole at the top of this very sacred hill. And so they became known as the Great Hill People. Now, these guys, like I said, they were very, very civilized. Everything was very much in order, including their crops. They're one of the tribes here in America, not the only, but one of them that practiced the three sister farming. So you grew together the corn, the beans, and the squash all in one place. And you see this great picture of it. So it saved room, and made it so you could have more crops because they're growing on top of each other, basically. So the early Seneca, they were subsistence hunters and fishermen, but their crops were very, very important to them. So alongside being very skilled at farming and diplomacy, they were also very skilled at warfare. You didn't want to mess with these people. They were great, great warriors. Again, the diplomacy thing and the democratic thing, but they were also great oratory, had great oratory skills. So these guys could tell stories. Just I don't think there's such a thing like that anymore. Like these great, beautiful stories of all kinds of things, magical, natural, just all kinds of great things. But they were also great negotiators. So those oratory skills came in very handy for entertainment and for diplomacy as well. Now, the Seneca are among the first tribes to really have European contact. And in the beginning, it was a type of contact that everybody was happy with. So it was mostly Dutch and French, French being the dominant European country that will have relations with the Seneca Nation. There were some British, but the British were just they were here to take land, and so the Seneca kind of pushed them away. So why the French and a little bit of the Dutch? Why were the Seneca okay with them? Because of the fur trade. So here in America, the Senecas were very, very skilled at capturing beaver. And in Europe, especially France, because I don't know, those people have always dressed the most beautiful and they're so sophisticated. And they had gotten wind of this new type of fur, beaver fur. And I don't know if you've ever touched beaver fur, but it is so soft and so luxurious. And back then, it was a trend, especially in France, for ladies to wear these fur wraparound hats and these muffs. And you probably don't know what that is, but it's like this circle made of fur, and in the winter you put your hands in it and you hold it in front of like on your belly, and it keeps your hands warm. So when women of France and Dutch and British decided that this was the new trend and this beautiful soft fur, they just had to have it. So our European guys didn't know how to catch beaver. Beaver are pretty smart. So they went to the Seneca Nation and other tribes and asked them if they would teach them. And of course, in exchange for teaching them, that then the French would give them gifts and the British would give them gifts. And one of the things they gave them was weapons, guns. For the first time here in America, the Seneca will have firearms, and they are among the first of all the tribes to have firearms. And so that very much gives them a military advantage over the neighboring tribes. I do have to add, too, that one of the things that the French people brought with them was alcohol. Now, the French were basically the only European country that was invited to come and stay with these tribes because they didn't seem threatening. They didn't want land. They wanted to be taught. And so they were allowed to actually stay among the tribes, and they brought this alcohol with them. And that is the first introduction of alcohol. And now we know in modern times, many, many native nations deal with the problem of alcoholism. And it starts all the way back with this friendly exchange between the French and the Seneca and other tribes eventually. So that wasn't an intention of the French, but it becomes a reality. Also a reality is disease. So the Seneca or any of the other nations were not prepared for what was about to happen to their people. They meet these new people from Europe, they get all these cool things like weapons, and they think it's going to be a great thing, and suddenly they start seeing their people die in massive numbers. Now, of course, there was not a lot of tracking of numbers like I talked about. We don't even know if some tribes may have never been accounted for because they died so quickly. But it is estimated that the Seneca, just the Seneca, lost 90% of their pure blood tribe. So if you don't have enough people to defend your people, you're in trouble. So they started something called the mourning wars, mourning as in mourning the death of someone. And these were wars that were started by the Seneca Nation and other parts of the Iroquois Confederacy to you start a war with a tribe, you wipe out enough of them that you can take the survivors and incorporate them into your tribe so that your population is replenished. And many, many tribes are going to start doing that. But the Seneca are such great warriors that they're going to basically absorb most of their neighboring indigenous people. And so their tribe becomes very, very mixed. Their pure blood tribe is going to go away, and all of a sudden, you see this change in warfare, it's a desperate warfare. It's not just like, hey, you can't be on my hunting grounds. This is our hunting grounds. This was for survival. And so natives start tearing each other apart on top of course, the Europeans coming here and tearing them apart. One of the most famous tribes that was assimilated into the Seneca Nation was the Huron. So Lake Huron. Well, that's what it's named for. But that tribe was completely absorbed into the Seneca Nation and disappeared forever. But it was a way to recover population losses due to disease and the death from that disease. If you know anything about Native American history, you probably know that many tribes were invaded and their children were taken and placed in schools. And these were not schools most often that they went to during the day and then came home at night. This was their new home. Some of the children never went back to their original home. And the Seneca tribe is one of those tribes that was definitely affected by this new government idea that they would take the children, turn them into civilized, I'm using air quotes here, civilized people, because, they weren't already civilized, and they would go back home was a thought. They would go back home and they would civilize their parents and their grandparents. So there is a very, very famous school, famous for not good things, known as the Thomas Indian School. And Seneca children were forced to go to this school. So there is a video that I want you to go and watch when you're done listening to the Seneca. I think there's one more slide, but I want you to find out about this Thomas Indian School. You're going to have an assignment on it. So when I'm done talking about the Seneca, take a minute while we're still on the topic and go click on that video link for this week's assignments and watch it. It's very short, but it's very eye-opening too. So please go watch that. So we have to know what's happening with the Seneca Nation today. So they have about 11,000 Seneca in the United States, mostly in New York. How many are pure blood? We've kind of lost track of that. Probably not many after the Morning Wars, but they are working really hard to bring their heritage back to life. Now, recently, Governor Hochul apologized for the school that you're going to learn more about. And the Seneca went to her and said, we want a language immersion program to reteach our dying language to people. And when Governor Hochul had her people do research on it to find out how much this will cost, they found out it's going to be over $1 million. So that's not happening. So it was just a public sorry about the Thomas School and have a good life. So such is the way for a lot of governors when something like that is asked of them. I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying, you know, it was just an apology and nothing more. So there you go. We're going to move on to the Cherokee tribes now. Like I said, there are many bands of Cherokee. So this is kind of an overall summary. It may not be specific to every band of the Cherokee, but we do know that the very first time that any European ever talked about encountering the Cherokee natives was in 1540. Hernando de Soto came across a Cherokee tribe. And of course, things are going to go bad very quickly. But before that, I want you to see how large the Cherokee tribe was. So you have this giant area on this map. You see how many modern states it touched. And of course, it goes across Appalachia, and on either side of Appalachia, they're a huge tribe. So the Cherokee, the way that they stayed organized, and again, they're really good at government organization before we had anything to do with them. So each band had a local chief, and then all those chiefs got together and they voted in the big chief, the main chief. So they were very much held together and by that chief and all the chiefs under him. So it was a very cool way to get everybody organized. So the Cherokee Reservation is in Oklahoma, and everybody knows about that, the Trail of Tears. That was set up in 1828. And some of the Cherokee tribes decided that they would willingly go. They've been feeling the pressure to give up their land since 1817, and this is 1828. And some of them willingly went to Oklahoma just because they were tired of being threatened and being scared all the time. And so a lot of them will voluntarily move. If they had not moved by the 1830s, and this is after lawsuits and everything else, they were forced by the government to end up in Oklahoma. Now, there's going to be some tribes, bands of tribes that will stay behind. And if you look at the Cherokee community, the map now, you see where most of them did end up in Oklahoma, but there are some bands that did not. And so you can see on I guess they hid. Cherokee, North Carolina is one of them. So, and that's a really cool place to go if you want to see what the Cherokee tribe is all about. I mean, it's kind of touristy, but that's the way they make their money. But if you leave the touristy stuff and go look at Cherokee, North Carolina, you can see their culture and their love of their people, and it's just a really cool experience. So I suggest that you do that. But anyway, the point of my story is most of them ended up in Oklahoma. Let's look at the influence the Cherokee had specifically in Appalachia. They, like the Seneca, practiced Three Sisters farming, and they will end up teaching that to the Europeans that they come in contact with. Europeans had no idea what that was, but they were also really crafty. So you see this lady that is forming this basket. I watched some ladies do this when we visited Cherokee, North Carolina, and it is very, very complicated, very intricate, very time consuming, but these ladies just sit together and chit chat like it's nothing, and it's like a work of wonder. So if you go to Cherokee tribes and you're there to buy something, buy a basket because they're handmade. So that was started by the Cherokee in Appalachia, that and pottery, and it became the way of many Appalachian people and how they made a living. Another way that the Cherokee influenced Appalachia is storytelling. Appalachia is famous for storytelling, and a major part of that is from the Cherokee. So even today, there are all kinds of crazy stories that came out of the Cherokee tribe. Probably the most famous is the Wampus cat. This woman apparently put on this Wampus cat mask, like you see in this picture, and anyone she looked at went automatically insane. So I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story, but you're going to have an assignment in this unit about their storytelling. And so I don't want to give too much of it away, but know that that storytelling is still in Appalachia today, alive and well. And it's not just natives, it's everybody that lives in Appalachia. Storytelling is very much a way of life. So I wanted to give you a sense of what Cherokee, North Carolina looks like today. So I know most of you probably live in the local area around Blue Ridge. So it's not that hard to get to. It's not that far away. I feel like I'm a salesman for Cherokee, North Carolina, but I just would like you to see the culture because it is so amazing. Now I've gone to Oklahoma as well. My dissertation for my doctorate is about the Choctaw and Chickasaw. So my husband and I, we went to Oklahoma and visited all five of what we now call the civilized tribes. And I've always thought that the Cherokee, because they're probably the most well known, that they would be the most well off. But Cherokee, North Carolina, is so much prettier and doing so much better than the homeland, like, well, today the homeland of the Cherokee in Oklahoma. Very poor in Oklahoma. I mean, just so sad. But then you go to Cherokee, North Carolina, and it's a totally different feel. So if you're interested in the Cherokee, I would pick North Carolina before I went to Oklahoma just because. Now let's move on to the Choctaw. So, like I said, I did my doctorate on the Choctaw and the Chickasaw. And the story is that they were originally the same tribe that was controlled by two brothers who really loved each other. And back then they were nomadic. And so the two brothers decided to lead their people to a place that had more food. You know, winter was coming. And so they start out on this trek, and a snowstorm appears. And it is a very violent snowstorm. And the tribe gets separated, one brother with each part of the tribe. And so they became separated forever and became two separate tribes, the Choctaw and the Chickasaw. So there's very much alike. Their language is very much alike. Their customs are very much alike. But the European people, they did not mention, there was no recorded mention of the Choctaw name until 1675. And it was a Spanish priest who showed up in Florida, and he was writing back home, and he warned settlers, new settlers coming, about the Choctaw. So that's the Choctaw is what he was trying to say, that they were evil warriors and they would come and get you. And it's so far from the truth. The Choctaw actually really wanted to live peaceably in their homelands when the government, the new government, European government, started taking land. They saw what happened to the Cherokee, that the whole Cherokee, they were forced to go, and very violent things happened, and they're hearing all these horrible stories. So the Choctaw kept going to our government and saying, "What can we do? What can we do to be able to stay here?" And so the government kept forcing them to sign all these treaties. And of course, every time they signed a treaty, more of their Mississippi land disappeared. And eventually in 1830, they will be forced to walk the Trail of Tears, whether they like it or not, except for about 4,000 Choctaw that went and hid. And they hid in all these places in Mississippi, and they completely avoided relocation. So these are the descendants of the core Mississippi band that still exists today. And they survived basically by subsistence farming. Well, not even really subsistence farming, more sharecropping. So, people in the valley really, people in the valley, people along the Mississippi really took advantage of them. They knew that they were desperate. They knew that they were hiding. And so they kind of become subservient to the locals living in the area to stay hidden. Now, their living conditions were very, very poor. And finally, in the 1920s, the Bureau of Indian Affairs got wind of what was happening, and they established an elementary school in the main Choctaw communities and a hospital in Philadelphia, Mississippi as well. So they actually were like, "You don't have to run anymore. We know that you're there. We're here to help you." Of course, it was never enough, but the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians is the state's only federally recognized Indian tribe. So they do get like tax breaks and stuff like that. I know it's not going to make up for everything that happened to them, but it is something. So today, the Mississippi tribe has about 11,000 members. We know that they are about 50% of them are of pure Choctaw blood. The others, of course, are all mixed in. The strange thing about this is, though, two-thirds of the tribal population, the Mississippi tribal population, two-thirds are under the age of 25, which I guess that's good because that means that you're going to have lots of children to kind of fill out the tribe. But the Choctaw Indian Reservation in Mississippi contains more than 33,000 acres, and it spans over 10 counties. So they have room to grow and the potential to grow with so much of their population being under the age of 25. So let's look at their influence in Appalachia. Choctaw became a pretty dominant language for quite a while, which is odd because our government was trying to force the Choctaw and the Chickasaw and all the five civilized tribes to stop speaking their language. But the Choctaw language is pretty easy, and so lots of the settlers learned to speak Choctaw. And there's a lot of words in Appalachia that came from the Choctaw language. But here's the thing, the Choctaw were a very, very friendly group, and they were more willing to absorb other tribes' ideas like the Cherokee and the Chickasaw than to force their ideas on anybody. Now they're really good at storytelling and all the other things, but there's not really, and I hate to say this because I love the Choctaw people, there's not a record of any direct impact from the tribe on Appalachia other than the Choctaw language. But like I said, they allowed themselves to be influenced by other tribes rather than putting their ideas and culture out there. So it's just there isn't a lot of documentation on their influence in Appalachia. And for the final tribe of Appalachia, we're going to focus on the Pequot Shawnee. It's believed that the Shawnee migrated from Canada to settle in the Ohio River Valley in the early 1600s. Eventually, they're going to kind of get their government formed, and they're going to split into 5 divisions or tribes, each with their own civil chief and war chief. So there is no main chief for them to talk to, but they kept in contact with each other, and that's the way that they stayed organized. So these guys survived the Pequot by being dependent on mineral salts they mined from caves in Alabama. So these people were very, very desperate for salt because you used it to keep meat. Like think about a salted ham, you kept meat good. So people were very much willing to trade salt, trade goods to this tribe for their salt, and that kept them pretty flourishing, really, until the Revolutionary War started. For many reasons, most tribes will side with the British. And when it was over and the British didn't win, these tribes were very often decimated. And that's what's going to happen with the Pequot. After the war is over, their crops were burned, their tribes were scattered. The ones that could be gathered together were forced to walk the Trail of Tears. So the Revolutionary War really decimated the Shawnees that were living in the Ohio River Valley. Now, very much like the Choctaw, the Pequot-Shawnee, there is not a lot of recorded evidence what they specifically gave to Appalachia, Alabama, other than the salt production. That was all them. But they had so many customers that were Native American tribes that they kind of got blended. Now their number one connection was the Creek tribe. So a lot of the things that the Creeks are given credit for may be Shawnee or maybe not. So again, we don't have a lot of recorded evidence on their impact specifically individually on Appalachia, Alabama, other than the salt production. All right, this is where it gets a little bit weird. So the state of Alabama recognizes today the Pequot as a tribe, but the federal government does not. Other bands of Shawnee argue that this branch of Shawnee is fraudulent because they call themselves or they exist as a nonprofit organization. The tribe does, just the Pequot Shawnee. So they have about 300 members. Now, the federal government does recognize them as a nonprofit organization that raises funds for cultural awareness, but they do not, again, recognize them as a tribe. They are a nonprofit organization. So I've really tried to research this, like what do they mean by raising funds for cultural awareness? There's not a lot out there, and I don't know if it's because the other Shawnee tribes are kind of blocking that because they think that people with Shawnee are going to give them a bad reputation. I don't know. If you find out something, let me know. But there's just not a lot of information about these guys. As we come to the end of this very first unit, first, thank you very much for putting up with my annoying voice. Second, I hope you don't walk away from this thinking, wow, she was really vague about some of those tribes. The fact is, we just don't have a lot of information on many of them. The tribes are oratory tribes, which means they tell their stories by voice. They didn't write it down. So we are missing a lot of information. What we do know is that these indigenous people have been in Appalachia for over 10,000 years. Now, think about that. 2026 is America's 250th anniversary. 250 years. These guys have been in Appalachia for over 10,000 years, developing beautiful, complex societies, agricultural systems Europeans had never heard of. And to me, the most unique and important is the deep spiritual connection that they have to the land that Europeans just did not comprehend. Even to this day, I don't think that we really understand it. So, thank you very much for listening to this first lecture. I hope you got something out of it, and I will talk with you later.